One week.
Hold
No,
on.
sorry.
Tell me where we are. Okay. Okay, fellow Guyanese, a very good evening to you and welcome to this program of Rodney Groundings. I'm your host, Deon Abrams, and on today's program, our focus, of course, is on the elections of 2020, and in particular, we'll be looking at GECOM. You know that our last program we discussed events that were taking place in the Guyanese Elections Commission. And again with me today to continue that discourse are two commissioners of GECOM, Mr. Vincent Alexander and Mr. Desmond Trotman. Welcome, gentlemen, to Walter Rodney Groundings.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deon.
So, since we last spoke, we looked at the situation in relation to matters in the court, the possibilities for a recount and all of these things. Now, the court has ruled, and GECOM has been given, the commission has been given the mandate to go forward with the count because based upon the ruling of the appeal court, GECOM has that mandate to carry forward with that process. But we still have a number of, from what we've been hearing in the press and in the broadcast media, are a lot of back and forth in terms of where we should be. Now, you would have had a meeting as recently as Friday?
Thursday.
Thursday. What are the latest developments in GECOM in relation to the recount and the 56 days that have been proposed?
Thank you very much, Deon, and good afternoon to the viewers out there. Please excuse my wearing a mask, but I'm quite sure you're all aware of the national circumstances, in fact, the global circumstances. And therefore, even before I answer the question, I would like to continue the call for all Guyanese to observe the ministry's directives so that we can mitigate this pandemic and not subject ourselves to becoming victims of the pandemic. It's also Easter Saturday, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Easter Sunday, sorry, Easter Sunday. And so may I also take the opportunity to reach out to all Guyanese there on this occasion of Easter, and hopefully the message of Easter will have meaning to us as we go forward. GECOM. Well, you know, GECOM has re-embarked on the process of the recount. And I'm saying it has re-embarked because this is a process which was essentially initiated by an aide memoire between the leaders of the two major lists at the last elections, Mr. Granger and Mr. Jagdeo. They initiated this process by an aide memoire with supervision from CARICOM. And I want us to remember that because that is where this recount question originated. Outside of this recount that I'm referring to, GECOM had gone through all of the other processes that could have led to a recount. GECOM had gone through all of the other processes that could have led to a recount. So, for example, a recount was turned down in Region 3 by GECOM. A recount was turned down in Region 4 for the same reason that it was turned down in Region 3 by GECOM. A recount was commenced in Region 6 and they ran into technical difficulties and that was held in abeyance. A recount was agreed to in Region 5, but that recount did not commence. So GECOM had gone through lots of processes that led to requests for and determinations on recounts prior to what we are talking about. And so it must be clear to all that what we are talking about is not a recount provided for in the Representation of the People's Act. Those recounts were dealt with, whether positively or negatively, and are over with. What we are talking about is a recount initiated by the two leaders under an aide memoire which was witnessed by CARICOM and which provided for CARICOM to participate as overseeing the recount. Unfortunately, that exercise was aborted when the court made certain decisions which have since been overruled. And so we've gone back to the point we were at when we had the team from GECOM in, from CARICOM in to do the recount. And so it's important to note a number of things about the presence of that team. That team came with 5 persons, 3 of whom were electoral experts. They work in electoral agencies in their countries, I think Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and Grenada, and 2 academics. 5 persons. In the discussions we had with them, it was agreed that all 5 would participate in the supervision of the recount, and that each of them would be responsible for a workstation. It meant that at that time, we had agreed to 5 workstations. When I say we, I mean all of the commissioners at GECOM. We'd agreed to 5 workstations. And I'm saying that it's important to note that because we're now talking about 20 and 50 and criticizing what came before us, not conceding that we had agreed to 5 workstations, each one supervised by one of the persons from CARICOM. And in fact, having agreed to 5, when they did the check of the venue, they reduced it to 4. They reduced it to 4, taking into consideration, even at that time, what was unfolding in terms of COVID-19. Those 4 were intended to be 1 in the eastern hall of the convention center, 1 in the western hall, and 2 in the dome. And that was to facilitate social distancing, etc. So we'd agreed to 5. We also had agreed that it would be a total recount. That's the next important factor for us to note. It was agreed by those leaders, with the involvement of CARICOM, that we're going to have a total recount, all of the regions. And it's important to note that because there are people who are now calling for all sorts of other recounts other than a total recount, although those people themselves were the initiators of this activity which we are now re-engaging. And when they initiated it, in black and white, they agreed to a total recount. And so we are at the point now of setting up this recount. I said earlier, this recount is not a part of the normal Representation of the People's Act recount. This recount is being done under Article 162 of the Constitution and Section 22 of the Election Laws Amendment Act. Those are the 2 provisions that are being used to do this recount. None of those provisions provide specific procedures. In fact, none of them speak to recount specifically. What those provisions do is to give GECOM, in the first instance, the Constitution gives GECOM wide powers to deal with matters pertaining to elections. And it is that white power provision is being used in the first instance. And in the second instance, the Elections Law Amendment 22, it deals with the question of resolution of problems. Resolution of problems. Now, neither of the two specify the procedures for a recount. It is therefore incumbent on GECOM, in the circumstance of this recount, which is on charted waters, we've never done before, to determine what the procedures would be. Now, if it was a recount under the Representation of the People's Act, the GECOM Secretariat, the CEO, and the returning officers would be guided unequivocally by the Act. Stage 1, Stage 2, Stage 3, participants, etc. What we are doing does not benefit from that guidance in terms of Article 162 and Section 22. So we have to now determine how the recount would be done. It's important to note that from the very inception, the CEO said, look, this recount is out of my hands insofar as I have a statutory function and my officers that deal with recounts that are specified in the People Representation of the People's Act. This is not specified. This is uncharted waters. This is a commission-ordered recount. Therefore, the commission needs to give me clear guidance as to what they require in terms of the conduct of the recount, what process you want engaged in, what's the objective, etc. The CEO made that clear from the very, very inception. Against that background, we decided that we had to give directives, guidance to the CEO. In pursuit of that exercise of giving guidance, 2 commissioners made written submissions indicating what they thought the process should be. 2 commissioners made written submissions. The CEO insisted that he needed elaborate guidance. And so in addition to those written submissions, the Commission embarked on a process of discussion to give guidance. And so we had a session over 3 hours where we discussed and we said, look, we will go to the Representation of the People's Act and some of what's there we'll use, but we are not limited or restricted by what's there. And so we had detailed discussions, and based on those detailed discussions and the submissions which had been made, we said to the CEO, here is material, go and bring a draft document for us for further discussion and finalization in pursuance of this recount. So the CEO went away with our information to put that together, referencing the laws I referred to earlier, with the intention of bringing back to us a document that we would then massage and finalize as a Commission's document for the purpose of the recount. The CEO then, 2 days later, brought such a document. That document, among other things, mentioned or proposed or suggested that the exercise would take 156 days. Before we could get into any discussion of the document, a particular commissioner literally threw it out and said, this is unacceptable. 156 days are unacceptable. Threw it out. Another commissioner said, look, why not give me an opportunity to come up with another version of this document? So that in fact we had not gone into any detailed discussion of this document the CEO had brought. We agreed all right, we'll give you a time for the creation of another version, but we'll raise some preliminary points on the document before us. In that discussion, we addressed some issues. For example, one of the major issues we addressed was the role of the commissioners. Because there was a proposition that the commissioners would be integral to the supervision of the recount. They'd be on the ground supervising. We said, no, no, no. Commissioners can't be on the ground supervising. If at the same time, they're going to be the ones who are the arbiters where issues arise that requires a third-party intervention. Otherwise, it would be conflictual for them to be down there participating in decision-making, and when those decisions are questioned, to be up there arbitrating and saying this is the decision in relation to something that they were party to. So that's one of the matters that was discussed. Another one was the question of the role of the chairperson. There was a proposition of giving the chairperson a hierarchical role outside of the meeting of the commission. So in other words, the commission was going to be reporting to the chairperson, rather than the chairperson chairing the commission in his deliberations to make decisions. So those things were discussed as preliminary matters. The document having been castigated from the inception for the 156 days, the CEO indicated that he had arrived at those 156 days because in one of the submissions given to him, it was suggested that the commissioners should operate in pairs to supervise the exercise. Now there are 6 commissioners. If they operate in pairs, then there are 3 pairs. And his conclusion, if you're going to have 3 pairs of commissioners to supervise, then there's 3 stations. And so that became a major factor in terms of operationalizing this recount. 3 stations.
And that is one more than the initially proposed.
One less.
One less than the CARICOM.
One less than the CARICOM proposition. In addition to that, it was proposed that the work be done over a 10-hour period, from 9 to 6, I think it was. 9 to 7.
9 to 7.
From 9 in the morning to 7. It was also projected that to count each box would take 2 hours. So what in fact happened is you took the proposition of 3 stations, a proposition which the CEO reduced from our submissions, 3 stations, 10 hours, 2 hours per box. Those became the factors that determined how the time was arrived at. The time was not any subjective imagination of the CEO. The time was based on objective factors. And that led to a 156 proposition.
So all these things that you were talking about, the conditions of paired commissioners, those were decisions by the commission.
They were not decisions, they were suggestions.
Okay.
To be taken into consideration.
Suggestions were forwarded to them.
Were to be taken into consideration. Right? So those are the factors that influence the 156. So I find it rather unfortunate that those factors haven't influenced the 156. We didn't have a detailed discussion in the document, so this document didn't represent any decision of GECOM. A commission was going off to do a version of the document to come back 2 days later for detailed discussions. That commissioners will run out there criticizing the document, and more specifically criticizing the CEO for the presentation of the document. There was no basis for that whatsoever. The matter was under discussion, and the document was not a CEO originating document. It was a CEO's putting together of a document based on thoughts expressed by the commissioners and objective circumstances. Therefore, that day, when we adjourned, and the press asked me about the discussions, my response was this: I think it's unethical for me to comment on a document which is now before the Commission for discussion. We have not had those discussions. We've adjourned for another version to be prepared, and therefore it can't be right for us around out here making any judgments on that document. But unfortunately, that was not a position taken by other commissioners, one of whom pointedly castigated the document, when in fact the idea of paired commissioners was his idea. The idea of paired commissioners was his idea. We have since reconvened. We have certainly expressed our views about what had occurred, what for me was unethical behavior, and we reconvened to discuss the document the CEO has presented, taking into consideration the document which was then brought forward, ostensibly at this time to be a document of 3 commissioners. One commissioner asked permission to come up with a version.
Yeah.
He came back with a version and said, look, this is not just my version, it's 3 of us. So be it, 3 commissioners. But more than that, we have heard in the public domain, this is the PVP version. I didn't know the PVP to sit on the commission. So we now have a PVP version.
Okay.
And the news is that we are, the CEO has been given time to work with the PVP's version. That's not the case. The base document is the CEO's document. We have this submission, and what the CEO has to do, based on discussions that last somewhere in the vicinity of
9 hours. 9 hours?
9 hours. He now has to take that information, come out of that discussion, to come back to us with another document for our determination. Whilst he's doing that, Tom, Dick, and Harry have now joined the fray to say what should be and what should not be. And some of what they're saying, in my view, is laughable. We don't know as yet how many hours the exercise will take. We don't know. So there's no 156 out there right now. One of the set of people who've come up with suggestions say once the count starts, it mustn't stop. So you must work 24 hours. Now, one factor that will have to be taken into consideration is COVID-19. Even the original proposition to work from 9 to 7 will require some exemptions from the directive in relation to COVID-19. We didn't create COVID-19, but it's there and it's reality. And you're dealing with human beings, right? You're dealing with life. So that even the original proposition envisages some conversation about how do you deal with COVID-19. And here we have people now suggesting that you must work 24 hours.
The same people?
No, external people, but associated. You must work 24 hours. Now, I don't know how that's going to play out, working 24 hours.
No, I'm talking about the 24 hours. Because if you are saying that the commissioners must be there and these
No, these are people now coming with another proposition.
Oh, okay.
Saying that they have a proposition, and it is signed by 2 small parties. It is signed by 2 small parties, and that this is their proposition, that we could work for 24 hours, and a number of other things in terms of shifts and all of that.
And who must be brought in to...
And who must be brought in to do the exercise and things like that. But there are just some ridiculous things that have been used in an effort to criticize the CEO. Let me give you one example. These same votes were subject to a count at the end of E-Day. At the end of E-Day. In some places, the count took an hour, in some places 2 hours, in some places 3 hours, different times, because of the size of the electorate in the particular place. The CEO suggested an average time of 2 hours a box. These people are now suggesting an average time of 1 hour per box. That's to be discussed. But in criticizing the CEO, they say, why if in one night we could count all of these votes, why we got to take 156 days? So they're juxtaposing the operation of one night to the new operation. It is so illogical, so irrational, that either something is wrong with the people who are proposing it, or they are mischievous. Why? The count on that one night, let's just accept their 1 hour, meant we would have taken 2,339 hours to count. 2,339 hours. If you apply the 1 hour to the CEO's proposition, it will take 1,560 hours. So in terms of the time being taken on the CEO's proposition, it is less, using their 1 hour average, than the time taken election night. So to go about telling people if they do it in one night, why they got to take 156 days, is to be comparing things that are not equal. The 156 days is not 156 days 24 hours per day. It's 10 hours per day. And it is not a lateral count. Election night is a lateral count. Everybody count the same time. We had a count taking place in 2,339 places. 2,339 places were counted simultaneously. If you will have a count that the leaders agree will be a sequential count from 1 to 10, there's nothing simultaneous about that. You're taking box by box by box. And therefore, the time is comparable with the time taken for a lateral count, but the exercise is not lateral, it's sequential, and therefore it will stretch over a longer period, though the actual working time is not necessarily going to be more, and in fact, using the average of 1 hour is going to be less. So that people are, we're going to the Guyanese public, riling them up with information that's inaccurate, misleading, ill-founded, and I dare say malicious. And so that is how we have been led into this public debate that somebody wants to take 156 days, when in fact there's no one body who's made a decision as such. And the logic of the argument are tremendously flawed, if not maliciously proposed.
Well, thanks a lot for the explanation, because we get the impression, from all that we've been reading, that this is really an outrageous proposal that came directly from the CEO, that it was his design, his concoction and everything. But now we understand that clearly he was given some kind of framework in which to operate, and it is based upon that he came up with that. But 156 days, Brother Trotman, is that the first time we've had an extended period for Recount?
No. We had the CARICOM audit of 1998, which which really took a long time. But I don't think that we want to go there now, except to say that persons seem not to understand that this exercise is one which is so important that it cannot be rushed. But I want to touch on a few things that Well, add to what Vincent has said, because he has really been very explicit in terms of what is going on. And before that, anyhow, I want to start off by saying that I support the positions which he took in relation, in his opening remarks in relation to COVID-19 and the Easter greetings which he sent out. I think it's important for us to keep those things in focus so that our every actions will give meaning to.
And we got to remind people that the Prime Minister has said that, you know, we still should not have gatherings on Easter Monday and so on, so that people can understand. You see, the Americans have gone over 20,000.
Yes. The thing is just so. In fact, I was looking at NBC sometime last night, and I discovered that while it is that Trump is saying that there is a possibility that there will be reductions in some areas, in some other states, the thing is now escalating.
Right.
And so that and they've put down the escalation, in relation to the gathering of persons. Now the thing word is that, you know, you got to observe the
stay at home, the social distancing.
Yeah, but I wanted
and
to
the
say,
wearing of masks.
Yes,
that one had a moment of amusement, where I think it's in Czechoslovakia. There's a nudist beach.
Okay.
And the police approached the beach and upbraided the people on the beach for not having masks, though they continue to be nude. I found that hilarious.
Okay.
But as I said, I really don't want to add to anything. I mean, I don't want to touch on the things which Vincent dealt with directly, except to say a couple of things. That it's very clear that when it is that the CEO came with his proposed plan based on the direction that he was given, Commissioner Bin, because I want to be very open here, Commissioner Bin's response was abusive, disrespectful, and not taking into consideration that the man was given directions to work with. And we had cause to remind him that all that he has done is brought some proposals to us which we will need to flesh out. And I think he was taken aback by that, even though he started off by being very vicious in terms of his attacks against the CEO, his deputy, and his personal assistant, and the RO4. Extremely vicious. Secondly, he had brought a plan to the commission. And that plan sought to give the impression that the commission must concentrate only on Region 4. And in fact, the PPP commissioners, one of them was Sibat says Gunraj and Bibi Shadiq, who had joined the conference by Skype. They were trying to give the impression that the chair had made a commitment to the Chief Justice, which she said that she did, and that there was a decision in the commission in support of that commitment. And even in spite of the fact that the chair was saying, no, I did make a commitment, but there was no discussion in the commission, no discussion at all in the commission relative to that commitment I made. They were trying to force her into an admission that she made a commitment for the commission to only consider Region 4. They also went on to say that in the discussions that we had with the CARICOM wise men and women, wise women and man, that there was also that commitment that we will only do Region 4. And that anyhow, that was knocked down. It is very clear to me, because here I want to offer my opinion on what is happening in the commission, because in spite of all of those discussions which Commissioner Alexander alluded to, including the near 9 hours that we spent on Thursday trying to flesh out, and when we thought that we had agreed positions, they reneged on it. that, and I had cause to say this, that it seems to me as if it is that the PPP, while they're arguing that they want to recount, in actual fact don't want to recount. And for them, if there's going to be any kind of recount, it has to be only in relation to Region 4. So that the populace out there must get an understanding of what is it we face with in the commission. It requires, because there's an upsurge of so-called expert evidence being provided by persons who seem to have fed on Jagdio's propaganda and is now laying it out. They're now laying it out as if it's gospel. That they're committed to ensuring that if there's any count at all, the count must be Region 4. And I want to tell you about something that is even worse. Commissioner Ben himself had even proposed that as the count proceeds, if there's agreement by the observers that there's no dispute with any box, that those boxes must be set aside and only deal with the boxes in which, there are disputes. There are alleged disputes. Now the fact of the matter is that the two leaders, including their own, said that they wanted to have a recount of all of the boxes, including their own. And I gather that they were serious and that all of the boxes, regardless of how it is people feel, had to be gone through and conclusion arrived at what was there. But they're saying now that in order to fast track the process, that if there's agreement that some boxes are okay.
So how will you arrive at that position that the boxes are okay?
But how will in addition to that, how will you arrive at a reliable count that will give confidence to all of the stakeholders in the process? Because this is not intended to satisfy the concerns of all of the stakeholders. That proposal, and to limit the exercise only to Region 4, is only intended to satisfy their supporters. And it cannot be. It cannot be. And so that we have to understand what is playing out, both at the level of the commission, and why it is that the propaganda is geared to ensure that what should take place doesn't take place. Because the way Commissioner Alexander has laid it out is what we feel. I mean, the end result of having a count that will say that the elections is credible will not be realized. Because if you only counted some of the boxes and not all of the boxes, you will not be able to say with any degree of certainty that what comes out of this exercise is what is it that you want it.
All right, so we've had a lot of, like you were saying, that a lot of people are saying that Mercury is influencing the United States, the State Department and officials and other agents of the teams that would have been part of the process of monitoring our elections and so on. And even today in the Starbuck News and so on, they're pointing out that these agents are pretty vocal in their quest to have what they are saying must be a fair election process. Does that fairness involve this total recount that we're talking about?
Deon, the recount is articulated as a validation process. In other words, a total recount is intended to remove any doubt about the actual result. And so the total recount is a validation in the face of all the accusations that have been raised of the numbers. But let me go a little beyond that. In the CARICOM arrangement, it was clearly articulated and accepted that the objective of the recount was to get a final count and to determine the credibility of the elections.
Okay.
And we're not going to lose those. We're not going to do away with that. So it's not merely a final count, but to get a statement of credibility. There are those who are now saying, look, this thing is a numerical count. And they're deriving a lot of other things off of that trajectory. So, for example, I saw some of them saying that each ballot would require 15 to 20 seconds to be verified. And so that is their basis for coming up with how long the exercise must take. Each ballot, 15 to 20 seconds. They're completely ignoring the fact that from the very inception, it was agreed we going into the ballot box, and that in the ballot box there's something called a poll book, which you will examine to see if there are matters there that need to be interrogated. That you have to go into the ballot box and take out the list and determine that the list has a certain number, and that the number of ballots in the box don't exceed what's in the list.
Okay.
But further than that, to see the names crossed off on the list, because those are the actual people who voted, and determine that the ballots don't exceed the number of names crossed off.
All right.
So you're not just going in there
And come to
and do a numerical count.
Water tin.
You're going in there because it's a validation exercise. In the commission, we have had discussions where it came to our attention that there were instances where the ballots did not have the 6-digit stamp, top and bottom, and in some instances where they had the stamp, because of the condition of the stamp, all the digits didn't come out. We discussed that and said, look, this is a matter we have to interrogate when we go into those boxes to make a decision as to how we will treat with ballots which didn't have the stamp and weren't counted, or ballots which were badly stamped and weren't counted. So this is not something numerical. This is a qualitative engagement. You have to make determinations. So these people who come in and tell you that 15 to 20 seconds is enough are reducing the exercise to a mere numerical count and not doing what we agreed to unanimously must be done. And if one were to become scientific about the 15 to 20 seconds, they seem to be going back to ancient days where they're using a time and motion approach to this matter. The Hawthorne experiment showed us decades ago that when you deal with human beings, you don't merely get involved in time and motion. There are a lot of other factors that determine the speed of human work. So don't come to me telling me 10 to 20 seconds and you arrive at a final figure. You're dealing with human beings. So that there's a lot of maneuvers to take us out of the original
Intention.
understanding of what we're becoming engaged in. We become engaged in recount, but in the process of that recount, there's verification to be done because the recount is intended to validate the election, to give credibility to the elections. And you can't give credibility to the elections when people were given ballot papers, cast the vote, and some official, for whatever reason, didn't put on the 6-digit stamp, and suddenly those votes have no value. These are matters that have to be interrogated and a determination made so that we get a final count that is a credible count of the elections. So that these external forces have their own agendas that do not speak to the reality of GECOM, the decisions of GECOM, and the work to be undertaken by GECOM. And so GECOM has to stick to its guns, notwithstanding all of the comments being made, to ensure that we are responsive to that agreement which says we will have a recount which would give us a final count and a statement of credibility about these elections.
The other issue, I mean, because there seems to be a lot of vacillating in terms of where the recount should begin and where it should end. And the last thing I've heard is that people are saying that, well, look, we should begin with Region 4. You have outlined the whole idea behind the recount, and we're taking it that if it is going to be, then there should be a methodology, some form of, some methodology that you're applying, that you can't start from 4 and go to 1 and then jump to 5 and 6 and so on. That if you're going to be counting and you're doing a total recount, then you start from 1 and you proceed through 4, 5, 6 and until you get to the end. Where is this idea that, well, Region 4 is where the problem is, and that is where we should start? Where is that coming
You have said it. Whilst the leaders agreed that there will be a total recount from 1 to 10, there are people now saying the problem is Region 4, so count 4 alone. Don't worry 1 to 10, count 4. Or even if you don't count, even if you count 1 to 10, start with 4. Let me settle 4. Now, there are all sorts of maneuvers that one anticipates will come out of that approach. The fact of the matter is, the agreement was 1 to 10. It is true that when the CARICOM team came, they made a proposition that they could start with 4. That's true.
Okay.
I question why you want to start with 4 in a recount that is all 10. The CARICOM's articulation at that time was, look,
We're fresh.
we are fresh, we just arrived. 4 is the biggest. And since 4 is the biggest, let us get over the tedium of 4. And so by the time we start to get tired, we're dealing with lesser numbers, because 4 is almost between 40 to 45% of all of the votes.
Okay.
So that's what they approach. Now, they're not here. The rationale for that no longer exists. But people are trying to hold on to that without any reference to the reason why it was proposed. The count is from 1 to 10. And we have to work out how we can expedite that recount as quickly as possible. One of the suggestions which has been raised is that, yes, 4 is big. And so if you're going to have a number of workstations, what you could do, you can run 4 on one workstation, and parallel to running 4 on one workstation, you can run 1 to 10, except 4, on another workstation, or on other workstation. So that what you will be doing, in a sense, is arriving at a complete count.
At the same time?
At the same time.
Because that was a concern of mine, because one of the things that we've been hearing is that the idea behind the push for a count of Region 4 is that the PPP wants to, if Region 4 is declared, and that according to the figures that they have, that, well, look, they can say, well, we have won, Region 4 is done, we're opting out of the process. How valid will that be in terms of them agreeing to be part of it, and once Region 4 is done, they're using that to validate their...
But you know, the chair of the commission said this, that our interest is to ensure that at the end of this process, all stakeholders are satisfied.
Okay.
And that for her, providing that satisfaction means completing the exercise 1 to 10. As Vincent just pointed out, we're in the process of looking at how it is that is going to take place. Because a lot of it is dependent, because we talked initially about doing an in-house meeting in a space provided to do that exercise. But then now there's an alternative suggestion of going open air. The place we're looking at is Ocean View. It's agreed that we're going to be using Ocean View.
Not Ocean View.
Not Ocean View.
Convention
Center. Convention Center. We've agreed to use the Convention Center, inside the Convention Center. And Vincent told you what was the arrangements that was worked out. Somebody else proposed that we also give consideration to using the outside of the building, because there's a lot of yard space. What the CEO and his team has to do is to examine that and to see if it is something could be implemented. So you get the sense that there's no hard and fast rule about 156, because it's a proposal in consideration, and that you're looking at other alternative measures in order to arrive at a duration for the exercise. But the point I want to make is that the chair of the commission made it very clear that she has an obligation to ensure that all of the stakeholders are satisfied. And so I get the impression, even though, because Vincent will tell you that I had to say to her when we met on Thursday, because she was very concerned about something that appeared in the Starbuck News, I had to say to her that she has to understand that what is happening here is that pressure is being brought to bear on her in order to arrive at a decision that is not satisfactory to all of the stakeholders.
All right. It's a concerted effort, basically, to force the hand of GECOM, and in particular the chairman, into making a decision that possibly is not. I really didn't want to go back there, but within a few minutes that we have, about 10 minutes or so, the declaration. GECOM is on its way to doing its recount, I know. But only recently I saw it coming up again that, GECOM should have never gotten there in the first place, that the results were declared, and that, the declaration should have gone forward, and the president's warning, and the petition should have been the means for the recount. How are we? Because it's a position that is still being touted by some. Mr. Alexander, how will you?
Well, Deon, I have never, during this episode, commented on the results per se. And I'm not about to do that.
Okay.
Suffice to say that from a procedural perspective, I think there's a significant amount of misrepresentation of what occurred. The first thing that went wrong, and GECOM has to take responsibility for that, is in Region 4, District 4, the count took place in an atmosphere that from Jump Street was
chaotic,
hostile, chaotic, and it had attendance that went beyond the stipulation of the law. The law provides for certain people to be in attendance. If you saw what was taking place, and I saw it from a distance, in the first instance, it was like a marketplace.
Okay.
Lots of people who were not authorized were there.
Including observers?
Including observers.
Okay.
Lots of people who were not authorized to do certain things were doing those things. So, for example, My understanding is that observers observe. At the end of the process, they issue a statement based on the observation about the process. We had a situation where the observers, particularly some local observers, were making demands in the course of the process. What is to be done, what is not to be done. I am not saying what was right. I'm not saying what was wrong in terms of what was being done. But I'm saying that the situation was chaotic because people who were not authorized to be there and people who were authorized to be there but not authorized to participate in a particular way, they were all in breach. So we started off on the complete wrong footing in relation to District 4.
Okay.
Based on their observations of whatever was happening, I went to the court. The court apparently gave a decision. My understanding was, from what I saw, GECOM came back and sought to change the way they were doing things to respond to that decision of the court. The chairman had given an undertaking to the court because they went back to the court and said, GECOM not doing what it's supposed to do, contempt. The contempt matter was never, a judgment was never given on the contempt matter. Never given. The chairman gave an undertaking to the judge, I'll go back and make sure things are all right, and that would settle the matter. My understanding is that things changed. Things changed to respond to that. So the contempt matter was never heard. Things changed, but the contempt matter seemed to be like a sword of Damocles hanging over the chairman's head. That you give an undertaking, this matter hasn't been discharged with, and therefore if you don't do a recount, which was a part of our undertaking, you will be held in contempt. But the chairman herself has said unequivocally that though she gave an undertaking at that time, that undertaking was never discussed and agreed to by the commission. Okay. And the question that stands to be answered is whether the changes that occurred after she gave that undertaking were sufficient for the threat of contempt to be dismissed. That question has not been asked. It's not been answered. So that GECOM progressed to the point of a final declaration of District 4. In the normal course of things, the contesting parties have a certain period of time within which to ask for a recount. They did that. That recount was not granted. Why was that recount not granted? The law specifies you have certain people who carry certain functions in the electoral process. My understanding is, like in Region 3, where the recount was not granted, the wrong person applied for the recount. In Region 3, as I understand it, AP and UAFC asked for a recount. The returned officer didn't grant it on conditions that, look, this person who write asking is not the person who's authorized to make such a request. Okay. And my understanding is that in District 4, the person who wrote similarly is not the person who is authorized to make such a request. So that GECOM has procedure, and even if something goes wrong, they fall back positions to grant redress.
All right.
Right? And I do not think that one could justifiably say that GECOM was not in line in terms of its procedures. Because one, the matter of the contempt has never been pronounced on. So we can't say at this time that in fact GECOM continued to be in contempt. And two, the recourse that was available for things that may have gone wrong was not activated because the correct procedure for requesting that recourse was not followed, and that this was not a matter pertaining to Region 4 singularly. It similarly happened in Region 3, and it happened to different parties. So it just suggests some even-handedness in dealing with those matters.
All right, the final question. In light of all that you have said, pronouncements are being made about rigged elections and all of these things. How will you respond to those pronouncements that are being made daily on the social media and so on?
You can't have something rigged when you don't know the result.
There's that.
Okay.
We have agreed to a recount, which is intended in some regards to address all of those accusations and to provide a process and a result. If that process goes awry, and if that result is fraudulent, then you consider big elections. But we cannot at this time, in relation to undeclared national result, which is going to be subject to a process, come to a conclusion about the elections.
But I would like to add something to what Vince, let's say, in a different way. If this process that we are embarking on, which is intended to arrive at a conclusion, one way or the other, is being frustrated by one of the parties which is making the accusation about rigging. If the process is being frustrated by that party, one should ask the question why.
Okay. All right, I got your point. All right, people out there who've been watching, I want to thank you again for being with us on the Walter Rodney Groundings. I know the question of, having this matter resolved because the country is at a standstill and all of these things, it's pretty burning, but as the commissioners have said, it's really something that has to be settled in a way that is going to be satisfactory to all and sundry, so that when the declaration is made, there is no room for questioning and doubt and so on. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for being again on Walter Rodney Groundings, and I look forward to having you at any other time so that we can make the nation aware of exactly what is happening within the commission. To the people out there, remember, even though you have Easter Monday tomorrow, please observe the restrictions that have been placed on gatherings and so on, because we do not want this COVID situation to get really, really out of hand. Thank you for being with us again. See you next week, possibly same time, same channel, for another program of Walter Rodney Groundings. Good night.